This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, James. So this little section of Matthew's Gospel prompted me to consider the various types of authority that we each encounter in our day-to-day lives. Because the chief priests and the elders at the temple wanted to know by what authority or in what authority Jesus was acting and who gave him this authority. And Jesus is a little bit cagey in his answer to these questions. And in the conversation that follows, a number of different kinds of authority become evident. The first, of course, is a kind of a positional authority over people, a specified power, because the chief priests and the elders understand authority as residing in an institution or a person representing an institution. Now, we easily understand this kind of authority. I think we see it at work all the time. One example would be our court system. Okay, a judge acts with the authority of the institution that we know as the rule of law or the law system, the court system. Our society functions under this rule of law, and it's a kind of tacit social agreement we all enter into to varying degrees. We do not live in a society in which everyone does whatever is right in their own eyes. Does that phrase sound familiar to you? Everyone did what was right in their own eyes? You might have read it in Deuteronomy chapter 12, or perhaps more memorably, it's the final sentence in the book of Judges. It's a description of a barely organised chaos, of a society that is not under the rule of law. It said before there was a king in Israel. So the king represents this institutional power. Before that, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Institutional power is the power of previous decisions codified in a manner that is believed to be for the best interests of the people involved. That's what institutions do for us. They are the formal structuring of prior learning so that we don't have to make the same mistakes over and again as each new generation arises. Now, sometimes circumstances change so dramatically that previous wisdom no longer applies in precisely the same way as it once did. And we need to revert to first principles to kind of make sense of it again. We see Jesus do something like that when he confronts the institutionalized laws about keeping the Sabbath. Remember, he goes back to the first principles with the Pharisees and he says, human beings weren't created for the Sabbath. We don't do all this stuff just to maintain the Sabbath. The Sabbath was given to us for our benefit. That's the first principle here. The thing about this positional authority is it's not your own authority. It's delegated to you by virtue of your position or your relationship to the authority. The chief priests had certain authority because the chief priest had become the chief priest and was functioning in that office. Before he was the chief priest, he did not have the same authority. Were he, for whatever reason, to lose his office as the chief priest, he would lose the authority of that office. The authority belongs to the office, not the person who happens to be in the office at the time. Another example, in the Uniting Church, when I say and do things as the chair of the Sydney Presbytery Standing Committee, they carry a different authority in the presbytery and in the church to when I make my comments as just plain old Dave Gore. I recently took 6 weeks temporary leave of absence from my office as chair, and during that time I had no institutional authority. I was excluded from communications related to the Standing Committee. I continued to be plain old Dave Gore, but my authority in the Sydney Presbytery most certainly changed for those 6 weeks. This kind of authority, in a sense, is the most straightforward to identify. You are either in the office or you are not. You have the role or you don't. And this is what the chief priests and elders wanted to discover from Jesus. Who are you? What office do you hold? Who has given to you this authority you appear to believe that you have? And Jesus' reply with a question is a masterful move. It effectively lays bare the roots and the extent of institutional authority. See, institutional authority derives its power from a tacit agreement of the society in which it functions. If a society is moved to become suspicious of a particular institution, the authority of that institution will be impacted in a very real manner. The institutional leaders who were addressing Jesus in this conversation understood that much. The chief priests and the elders knew that if they went against the heartfelt convictions of the people, the institutional authority in which they operated would not be strong enough to resist the conviction of the people. Because there's a real danger here. The danger is of the de-evolution or the devolution of the society such that the rule of law gives way once more to the rule of the mob. Institutions hold the hard-won wisdom of a society over multiple generations. When we actually choose to divest personal power to these institutions in the interests of the ongoing well-being of the society as a whole over a bigger picture than just ourselves. Generally speaking, order and stability, even if a little bit confining at times, tends to offer more well-being to more people than chaos can provide. The absence of accountability and the triumph of opportunism rule the day when we have chaos, and long-term planning becomes impossible or just plain old moot because things change so radically from one day to the next, we can't anticipate what tomorrow might even bring. So buried in this interaction, kind of given a nod but not really openly acknowledged, just left to sit there as a fact that actually doesn't need explanation, is the ever-present power of fear. The authority of the institution is in part premised on the fear of the consequences of not having the institution. See, most forms of order are better at fostering life than most forms of chaos. We speak of the natural order. Life has an obvious tendency to organise itself. When an organism has died, it decomposes. The order goes out of it. The constituent parts are no longer held together in an ordered way, and they offer no life. They break down and become the resource for future forms of life, who will then take them up and organise them for a new purpose. The chief priests and the elders feared the chaos of the mob, not simply because it would mean the loss of their institutional power. It could actually mean the loss of their nation, their community, their culture. The whole thing could decompose. So often, as Jesus did, he told a little story. And it's worth noting here the way our brains develop, I reckon. It means that the final phase of development into our 20s, early and mid-20s, the frontal cortex of our brain is still developing. It's a part of the brain that holds and sifts the stories we live through and the stories we are told. And its job is to work out what these stories mean and how we can best use that learning for our ongoing well-being. So Jesus tells this story of a man with two sons, and he highlights the difference between virtue signalling and virtuous action. Because there's no law that governs what these two sons must do. They might have held fears that there was possible sanction from their father if they didn't cooperate with what he wanted, but there were no hard and fast rules. They had no choice. They had choice. They didn't have to obey one thing or the other. And this is clear in the difference of response from the two sons. There's no mention of ramifications from their contrasting decisions. What is clear is that both sons know what is good. It's equally clear that only one of the sons actually does what is good. Whereas the first son puts his ultimate effort toward a meaningful response, the second son puts all of his effort into merely signalling a virtuous response. And in this way, the second son gives himself to the ways of the prince of the power of the air. I really like that phrase for Satan, I think it is, because Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, "You were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you formerly walked according to the curse of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience." That's in Ephesians chapter 2 at the beginning there. It's a lovely phrase, the prince of the power of the air. It is the power of nothingness, the power of mere appearances without any substance. It is the power of marketing and advertising, of social media influencers and political operatives, the power of backroom dealers and hidden agendas. It is the triumph of appearance over substance. It is the way of our current age, and frankly, most of us are taken in by it most of the time, and we are in awe of those who harness this power and get what they want out of the world. We used to call these people confidence tricksters. We now more commonly encounter them as the new brand of leader. Jesus cuts to the heart of the matter when he identified that a tree is known by its fruit. It's what is actually produced rather than what is advertised or talked about that tells us what we are dealing with. The first son may have looked irresponsible, but ultimately he responded. The second son appeared very responsive, but he proved to be irresponsible. Given that there was no compelling law and no sanction for either son, neither for what they signalled as their intent, nor for what they actually ended up doing or not doing, as far as we can tell, it begs the question, why did the first son decide to obey his father? I mean, clearly he didn't have to. What made him change his mind? What was in it for him? All we get is the summary statement, afterwards he regretted saying he would not, and so he went and helped. It's as though in the context of the freedom to decide for himself, the first son came to appreciate what was good. Saying no gave expression to his freedom, his power, his autonomy, and then this son harnesses his freedom, power and autonomy and puts them to good use by serving his father. Why? 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 Because he loves his father. That's why. He loves his father. See, freedom from these things, freedom from being helpful or useful or making a contribution is an expression of fear. I might get hurt. I might get used. I might get taken for granted. The freedom that allows us to give ourselves to others is an expression of love. I want to contribute even though it may cost me. And here we see the most profound authority at work, and I believe this is the authority of the gospel. It is not an authority based on fear. It does not use the levers of coercion, nor manipulation or guilt. It is the grace that offers the space to discover what is genuinely good. Which does not mean you have to decide in a particular way, but it does beg the question, why would you choose anything else? Serving his father became the first son's own desire. When the authority has moved to a person's own conviction and their desire is to do that which is good, there is no authority more powerful than that. This is the leaven of the gospel because it changes the heart. It transforms the very fabric of our desiring. It forms entirely new desires in our hearts. The desire for that which is good, because we realise everyone is the poorer should we decide to do anything less. Tax collectors and prostitutes are so obviously not counted among the righteous in first century Palestine. However, their abandonment of all attempts to appear acceptable and their reliance instead on grace and the resulting transformation of the heart meant that these outcasts knew more about the kingdom than those who merely signalled their own righteousness. In the end, what you may or may not signal to the world is of no real consequence. Your life will be known by its fruit. And this is challenging because kingdom fruit and worldly fruit are quite different. The fruit the world notices is conspicuous wealth and consumption, gratuitous celebrity, political savvy. But the fruit of the kingdom is the fruit of the Spirit. Things like love and joy and peace and patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. Paul would write, against such things there can be no law. These things give expression to the highest of all authority, the authority that is the heart of God. A life lived in this authority is the richest life possible, so abundant in fact that it overflows and cannot help but bring life to those around us as well. Let's live under that authority. Let us pray. Lord, so often we fear things we dare not even identify. And yet your love continues to meet us in every part of our life and calls us to abandon our fear and to choose love instead. Help us to be wise as we do that and not foolish, but help us not to miss out on any of the good things you are calling us into, to the glory of your name. Amen.